Hello, everyone. Welcome. I my name is Russ. This is the Russ Reasons channel. Thank you all for joining us for this evening's debate. If you are here live, I appreciate you being here. If you're watching this later, thanks for joining. As you can see at the bottom of the screen, the topic of today's debate is: can Christians sue for defamation? Briefly is the topic. It's a little more nuanced than that, but Stan, since he'll be arguing for the affirmative, he will go first and he will kind of lay out the premise of the debate and then give his opening statement. We'll do about 10 minutes for him, give or take, to lay out his position. Then we'll do my 10 minutes and then we'll go back and forth and kind of have a open debate conversation style on things and answer any questions that you may have in the, that you ask. So if you have any questions you want to ask either one of us, let us know. We'd love to hear your feedback and what you think. And that's pretty much all I got. Well, let's get going. If you want to introduce yourself briefly, you can. Otherwise, let's go.
Yeah, thank you, Russ. Is it Ruslan, full name?
Technically, yes. I go by Russ these days.
Okay, all right, Russ.
I'm
We'll keep that Russ
Americanized.
then. I like it. I like it. All right, well, Russ, my name is Stan. Yeah, that's short for Stanislav, and I also don't go by that. No, but yeah, my name's Stan. Thank you for setting up this debate. We've been going back and forth, and I am excited to start this debate. And Um, yeah, to preface, I am not a pastor. I am not a theologian. I am just a regular Christian, interested in testing my logic, testing my friends, my brothers in Christ logic, testing my own theology and my fellow Christian brothers' theology. And I think that's a beautiful part of Protestantism, where we can bounce questions off each other. We have the ultimate authority in the scripture, but I'm not the ultimate authority in interpreting the scripture. Neither is Russ, neither are the listeners. So I come here with an open mind to test my ideas and my logic that I bring forth. And I hope the listeners do the same, and as well as you, Russ. So the premise that I sent to you, um, just straight up, it's ministers may, and in some cases should, sue for defamation. Um, that's the standard premise. I just want to iterate that I am not arguing about ego driven lawsuits. I am not arguing about vengeance driven lawsuits. And this goes for pastors and ministers, but also members of the church. But I'm mostly focusing on ministers and pastors and elders, that kind of thing. All right. So I wrote most of mine down, but I'll try to keep eye contact as well. A minister's reputation is not about ego; it's about credibility. It's the vessel through which the gospel is heard, trusted, and received. Scripture says in Proverbs 21:1, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches." A minister's good name is not a personal property; it's stewardship entrusted by God. When false accusations destroy that trust, defending the truth becomes not prideful, but pastoral. Defamation is a newer term, but in the Bible, we see slander, bearing false witness against one another. Nowadays, we see libel, that's written lies about someone. And basically, it's knowingly spreading a lie about someone. Um, uh, I want to root my foundation and my understanding of it through the Bible, and we first read about it in Exodus 20:16. That's one of the Ten Commandments, surprisingly. The eighth commandment: you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Um, to read what kind of punishments one would receive, you find it in Deuteronomy 19:16 through 21. I want to read the whole thing. If a malicious witness arises to accuse someone of a crime, the judges shall make a thorough investigation, and if the witness proves to be a false witness, having testified falsely against another, then you shall do to the false witness just as the person intended to do to the other. So you shall purge the evil from your midst. And basically, that's saying if the accused would have been fined, now the false witness has to pay the fine. If the accused would have been beaten or exiled, the same punishment goes to the accuser, the false witness. And surprisingly, I didn't even know this, but during the research, if even if the accused would have been executed, the false witness is now put to death. Slander can um, slander can have the same punishment as murder, idolatry, and sexual sins. Um, and living in the 21st century, we kind of lose grips on that, where slander or lying about someone and gossip is almost an everyday thing. Like, we know people that do it. We even talk about it with our friends, like, oh yeah, this guy's a gossip, this girl's a gossip, but it holds really strong moral sin in the eyes of God. That I was definitely convicted doing my research as well. Um, and just a quick side note, Augustus, he wrote about it, and he says the listener to slander or listener to defamation is just as bad as the slanderer himself. Um, I was definitely convicted by that. Go on to read it in Proverbs. There's a lot talking about this, but Proverbs 19:5, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will perish. Proverbs 6:16-19, there are six things that the Lord hates, seven that are an abomination to him: haughty eyes, a lying tongue, and at the end, the seventh, a false witness who breathes out lies, and one who sows discord among brothers. The Bible does not forbid Christians from pursuing justice, it forbids vengeance. There's a difference. Romans 13:1-4 declares that civil authority is God's servant, is God's servant for justice. Using lawful means to correct falsehood is not rebellion against Scripture, it's disobedience to God's order. When Paul appealed to Caesar in Acts 25, he didn't do so out of pride, but to defend the integrity of his ministry. He said, I stand as Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be judged. Paul knew that allowing false charges to stand unchallenged would harm not only him, but the gospel message itself. In the section in the section from your video, a lot of people were referencing Matthew 5. That's if someone hits you on your left cheek, where is it? If someone slaps you on your right cheek, turn him the other cheek also. I don't know if you're going to bring this up, but I think it's a little faulty. Yes, Jesus taught us to turn the other cheek, but context matters. The command concerns personal insult, um, not systematic slander that destroys one's witness. Even Jesus, when struck unjustly in John 18, calmly demanded accountability. If I said something wrong, this is Jesus' words, testify to the wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you strike me? This is not passivity. This is like modern days we think of, oh, passivity, that's what would Jesus do? Jesus was not passive. It was not passivity, it is truth defended with dignity. Jesus stood for the truth and he declared the truth falsehood would when falsehood was said. Another verse that came up a lot was 1 Corinthians 6:1-8. I'm not going to read the whole passage, but Paul condemned lawsuits motivated by greed, revenge, and against fellow believers within the church. There's a specific phrase that he uses: trivial cases. He was addressing petty personal disputes, not public defamation destroying ministry credibility. So, from a biblical standard, when reconciliation fails, when truth is trampled, and when falsehood threatens the pastor's witness, legal action can be used. The goal is not revenge, it's restoration, restoring faith, integrity, and the good name that represents Christ's work on earth. To defend the truth is to defend the gospel's messenger. To defend the messenger is to preserve the message. Therefore, ministers should, and indeed sometimes must, pursue justice even through the courts to protect their reputation from slander. Some historical evidence that I looked into was Basil the Great, he was 4th century early father of the church. He implemented a lot of these civil restrictions and civil punishments for um, not specifically his monastery, but surrounding monasteries, um, to have punishment, and that was after being judged, there would be punishment dealt onto the wrongdoer, onto the um, slanderer. And a quote from him is, "The reviler and slanderer is condemned alike with the murderer. For the tongue blows its sharp. For the tongue's blow is sharper than the sword." Sorry. And Augustine followed him, couple probably 25, 30 years later. Augustine forbade defamation in his monasteries as well. The quote from him is, "Let no one speak evil to another. Whoever delights in another's sin sins doubly, by joy in iniquity and by slander." And um, I wasn't aware of this, but looking into it, a lot of the rules and civil disputes were among women filing them, appealing to the judges and saying, "This man, this someone falsely accused me of a wrongdoing." Most times it was saying that she was doing something provocative or she did something provocative, which was a big, big concern, especially for the church. And that was very important to them to find the truth in the matter. And then the evildoer was either banished from the church for 5 to 10 years, had to pay penance. It's a little different structure of the time, but there was always a, how should I say, there was always this punishment for defamation and for slander. And I think the Bible doesn't forbid it for ministers in our time. So that's my opening statement.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Cool. Well, I will now give my prepared opening statement, and then we will go into kind of some back and forth and explore some of the ideas you've shared and I will share, and we'll kind of see how it goes. Need some water. All right. So I also wrote my thoughts down, so I will be mostly reading as well. So as Stan has already said, the resolution before us today is ministers may and should, in some cases, sue for defamation to protect their reputation. I stand in firm contradiction to this proposal. I believe that a minister initiating a secular lawsuit is not a net positive. It is a compromise, a strategic failure, and a spiritual defeat. The minister's calling is not like that of a CEO or politician. A minister is expected to live by a higher standard, a standard of sacrifice, forgiveness, and integrity. When a minister chooses to use the power of a civil court to fight a personal reputation battle, they abandon that high standard for the aggressive, costly, and worldly path of litigation. A defamation lawsuit is a failure on 3 critical points. It fails the spiritual test, the stewardship test, and the public relations test. I'll explain each of these. Spiritual defeat. Apostle Paul, writing to the church in Corinth, gave an extremely strong command. He told Corinthians that are going to secular court against each other, he said to them, it is a sign of failure. When one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? Or do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Do you not know that we're going to judge angels? How much more then matters pertaining to this life? So if you have such cases, why do you lay them before those who have no standing in the church? I say this to your shame. Can it be that there is no one among you wise enough to settle a dispute between the brothers, but brother goes to law against brother? And that before unbelievers? To have lawsuits at all with one another is already a defeat for you. Why not rather suffer wrong? Why not rather be defrauded? But you yourselves wrong and defraud, even your own brothers. The core message is this. A minister's job is to represent Christ, who suffered the ultimate wrong, yet did not retaliate. When a minister is defamed, they are being defrauded of their good name, yes. But the spiritual, Christ-like response is to endure the wrong, trust God for vindication, and protect the spiritual integrity of the church above their personal reputation. A lawsuit demands the exact opposite of that. It demands self-vindication. You prove yourself right. You prove yourself to be justified. You employ financial retaliation against the person who spoke lies about you, and you go to a secular judge to declare who is telling the truth. By demanding a secular court settle a personal dispute, the minister is essentially announcing to the world, 1, I do not trust the church's leaders, whether it be the elders, the deacons, the bishops, or whatever governing body the church falls into, to find the truth and defend me. 2, I will not follow the biblical command to accept suffering and endure being wronged. And 3, I am prioritizing my personal feeling of humiliation and emotional distress over the spiritual unity and peace of the body. The act of suing, by its very nature, brings shame on the Christian faith and shows the world that when the going gets tough, the minister puts their legal right above their spiritual duty. Secondly, we have the stewardship failure. Lawsuits cost money, a lot of money. Defamation lawsuits are one of the most expensive type of civil cases. Even a simple case can cost between $20,000 and $60,000. If the case goes to trial, and which often happens if you are desperate to defend your reputation, the cost can exceed $100,000. Where does this money come from? Usually not from the minister's pocket. It comes from the church's budget. It comes from the tithes and offerings that the congregation has given for missions, for outreach, and for feeding the hungry, and for spreading the gospel. I would like Stan to answer this clearly. How can a minister ethically justify taking $100,000 of sacred tithe money, which was meant for ministry, and diverting it to pay for lawyers to pursue the minister's personal civil grievance? For example, if a minister is accused of some wrongdoing and their first response to spend vast amounts of church money is on a private legal fight, they are committing a second, more visible act of wrongdoing, which is financial irresponsibility. They are sacrificing ministry resources to fight a personal battle. The decision in itself immediately damages the confidence of the entire donor base because it looks like a clear and visible misuse of funds. The lawsuit creates a verifiable financial truth. The minister spent the church's money to defend their personal reputation. It tells the world that rather than feed the hungry and help the widow, our church would spend its money on protecting the reputation of its minister. And the other failure is the strategic failure. From a purely practical standpoint, suing for defamation is a terrible strategy in the modern age. It takes what would have been just a small rumor or a small problem that is local to a church and turns it into a huge national or international scandal. Commonly known as the Streisand effect is when you try to hide or suppress information and it only causes that rumor, that lie, that information to explode in popularity. A small local fight about a minister's reputation would typically not leave the confines of that church, community, and people closely associated with it. But the moment the minister files a $100,000 lawsuit, the media headline changes. It becomes "Minister Sues Accuser Using Church Funds." The conversation shifts from the original unproven accusation to the minister's aggressive, heavy-handed use of money and lawyers. The suit ensures that the minister's name is now permanently attached to a negative narrative. Anyone who Googles this person from now on will find that they sued their victim or their accuser, and the accuser became the victim. And people naturally side with the person being sued by the large, wealthy corporation or church. Furthermore, a lawsuit is legally futile for a minister because most ministers lead large public ministries. They're generally classified as public figures in the eyes of the law. This means the standard of proof is incredibly high. The minister can't just prove the accusation was false. They must prove actual malice, meaning they have to show that the accuser knew the statement was false or that they acted with a reckless disregard for whether it was true or not. This means that in order to win this case, the minister has to prove that the accuser knew the accusation was false. And that is exceptionally difficult, often impossible. So now, if you spend all that money and you fail to meet this standard, which is the likely outcome, the public doesn't think, oh, the legal standard was too high. They think the case was dismissed, so maybe the accusation was true, or at the least, believable. The lawsuit backfires, making the false accusation seem legitimate. And so, in conclusion, I advocate for the power of transparency. The best, most powerful defense of a minister's reputation is not a legal battle, but a commitment to spiritual integrity and radical transparency. If a minister is falsely accused of wrongdoing, the effective ethical response is not to file a lawsuit. It is to immediately hire an independent, third-party organization to investigate the claim. Then the minister publicly releases the results of the investigation, which proved the truth. This response is fast, relatively inexpensive, aligns with the church's values, and completely neutralizes the rumor without compromising the spiritual calling of the minister. So, in this debate, we ask whether a minister may and should, in some cases, sue for defamation to protect their reputation. I think the answer is a resounding no. The choice to sue replaces the moral authority of the pulpit with the coercive power of the court. It swaps spiritual leadership for worldly aggression. It takes the money that was consecrated to the Lord and gives it to lawyers that aren't looking for truth. They're looking to win their case. By seeking a worldly victory, the minister suffers a spiritual defeat. I urge all of you watching and Stan to take my side in this debate. All right, Stan, one of the comments I heard, or one of the comments I see down here in the comments for us is, and I put it up on the screen, Roman is saying, you're assuming in every case the pastor is using 100,000 of the church's money. Who says the pastor can't use his own money? Would you feel I will respond to that, and I'll let you kind of give your take on it as well. So the reason I'm assuming it's going to be church money is most ministers are not paid such fabulous amounts of money that they have $100,000 to go to court with. So, there are obviously the TD Jakes and the Joel Osteens of the world, but my assumption is that if a lawsuit is happening for defamation, it's happening with church funds. Do you see an issue? And Rebecca is saying the pastor's salary comes from the church to begin with. So, technically, even if it was
whose church,
right, it came from the church. Do you think the fact that church funds would be used to fight the defamation suit makes a difference?
Okay, so I wrote down a couple things from your opening statement. I'll answer this one first, and then if I could go down point by point.
Yep.
The money, I think honestly, I don't think it's that important of a point. And let me expand on that, because there's a lot of things that people can agree with. It's in a subjective opinion. For subjective opinion for you, it's not important enough to spend even if it's $100,000 on a lawsuit. But for some people, buying a $2 million church and having money that's meant for God to pay for a mortgage for this $2 million church, that's not worth it. Maybe we should all gather outside free. All the money should go only to missionaries. It's a subjective opinion. That's why it doesn't really hold much value. It's not an objective fact that how money should be spent in the church. It should be spent in the church how the church sees fit. If for this exact question. If the church ministry is struggling because of a false accusation against its pastor, against the leader of this flock, so-called flock, is hurting the reputation of the church, of the pastor, and in the eyes of the community, yes, I think it's more important that the church's name is cleared, the pastor's name is cleared, and that the non-believers who look to see like, oh, look at this Christian church, look what's going on. It needs to be proven that this is false and God is on their side. That's my opinion on that. You brought up Corinthians 6:1. It's it was interesting. I was thinking that if you were going to bring this up, and you did, I think it's might be slightly of a logical trap for you, because one can say that this passage, 1 Corinthians 6:1-8, can also be used for instances of abuse in the church from any man to a woman, and that you should keep it inside the church and not take it to the courts, not take it to the police, because the same logic stands. You're taking it to a worldly police. Let's keep it inside the church. Let's punish the person inside the church. And I know you strongly disagree with that. You call churches cults for that. And I would agree with you on that. I would fully agree with you on that. That's that. Um, let's see.
Sure. Well,
Yeah, you can go.
let's kind of let's zero in on that. Do you believe that there is a categorical difference between someone saying something untrue about someone else versus someone committing child SA?
Um, as there's levels of sin, and that's why I brought up in the Old Testament, it's one of the 10 commandments. God, this is objective truth. This is an abomination from the Lord: sexual immorality, child mutilation, um and how was the phrasing? Don't want to get this wrong. And bearing false witness. They're both abomination. I'm not going to rank them. Yeah, I personally, yes, child molestation, all this. I don't know if you wanted to refrain from using certain words, but
Yeah,
yes,
we'll
that
say
is wrong.
SA for
Essay,
that,
yes, essay,
just so YouTube
yes.
doesn't take
I
us down.
I got you. Would you agree with that? It's it's also an abomination of the Lord. It's also a sin punishable sometimes by death, just as SA in the Old Testament.
So I would have to say that in a practical sense, that maybe in a biblical sense, that slander or bearing false witness, yes, is a sin, but I would say that in a practical sense, the day-to-day consequences of someone committing assault versus someone saying something untrue about you are different. That I have to assume that those two things are not the same. And the reason I say that, for example, is because, of what I do. I say things about churches and ministers that people don't like sometimes. And what will happen is sometimes in the comments, but more often in the direct messages, they will write very mean and hurtful things to me. I do not think it is justifiable for me to respond and react to those untrue, hurtful, and mean things that they said to me in the same way I would respond if this person saw me, out on the street or at a restaurant, came up and punched me in the face. Do you think
Yeah,
my
I would
response should
agree.
be the same?
No, I would agree. It's not the same. I don't think I argued that. I think you're also comparing apples to oranges. That lying about someone, and let me give you another hypothetical. Say you have this ministry.
Mm-hmm.
This is a ministry. You have a social media presence, and you expose, sometimes rightly, maybe sometimes wrongly. I'm not gonna point fingers. Say there was a false accusation about you, about that you did SA, and
Mm-hmm.
let's say majority of people believed it. even your wife, she didn't believe it. Maybe it's inappropriate to bring, but so even your people close to you, they're like, they don't believe it, but they question it.
Mhm.
Your ministry, it takes a big hit. It takes a really big hit, and
Mhm.
until the truth is proven, your ministry isn't the same.
Do you think that by going to court, I could vindicate myself? That there is, if I was to
You could
win
definitely
a
could.
legal, if I was to win a legal battle and I prove in court, quote unquote, prove in court that what a jury or a judge decides in court that what this person said about me was not true, that would save my ministry. I wouldn't call it that, but they would save my channel.
Yeah, it would save you more than if you didn't have the proof and backing of a judge. If you like, if you're comparing, if you didn't do anything and you have the backing, the judge says this person is liable for defamation. They did this is proven false. Yes, I think it's obvious that more people would see that as credible. And if we can, or we can stick on it if you want.
No, I guess then the and this will probably transition us to a different point
Would you
is
agree? Would you agree that it does hold more value than not doing anything, or at least a
so
little
I
bit more
would
value?
so I would argue that in the long run it's not a net positive. You don't actually. I don't think you win. Um, the I I think once you're, and that's why I think one of the biblical requirements for a minister is to be above reproach. I think that's why the character of a minister is so critical, because I think that once the character of a minister is tarnished, I I don't think there's a way of recovering it. I don't think you can put the genie back in the box, if that makes sense. I think even if I was to go to court and I was to quote unquote prove that what I did was not what this person claimed, I don't think I genuinely don't think you recover from that. But the other thing that I kind of want us to talk about
But
is
it's log. Sorry, but you logically
Mhm.
can. It's a logical possibility that you can recover from it with proven documents or a court order proving that it's a logical possibility, and it's a very
Yeah,
plausible.
yeah, sure,
It's
sure.
not like a
Yep.
complete
No,
hypothetical. Yeah. Okay.
no. So I wouldn't say like what you're saying is just crazy talk. No, I
Yeah.
think a reasonable person could argue that a way to establish your innocence is by going through the court system. But then,
Hmm.
that gets us into the other kind of points that we had touched on or talked about, which was the idea that um, or I guess what I would like to bring up is, do you think that the name of any one particular minister is worth more than the reputation of the entire church, as in the body of believers?
No, no, it's not. Does that
And do
mean
you,
that the truth should be not found out? I don't agree with that.
Now, what defamation lawsuits are incredibly difficult to win. If you look, most of the time, defamation lawsuits do not end in a victory for the person who went and sued for defamation. What you end up is either the case being thrown out because the judge decides there's not enough evidence, or the you losing the case or settling out of court. Um, and if any of those things happen, which is more likely to happen than you winning it, are you not harming the body and the reputation of the body by doing so? By trying to vindicate yourself and by trying to prove that you didn't do anything wrong, you've now caused more harm?
Um, I mean, that hypothetical, yes, but I would say I'm more arguing not that defamation is the first resort. It's not the first thing you go to. It's not the first thing a pastor minister goes to. You do everything else, and if that person won't repent, if we're talking inside a church, um, if we're talking inside a church, well, first of all, if they're inside a church and they don't repent, that person should be excommunicated for slander, and then if the reputation of the community is of the church and of the pastor is still down in the community and people are believing this slander, then that should be the very last resort. I think this debate is a lot harder for you because you because I just have to admit, I just have to prove that even in one instance it's okay to do it, but you
Mhm.
have to prove that never, it's never a go-to. But like I can make a very logical hypothetical
Mhm.
of a pastor who he has, say he's a missionary and
Mhm.
he's dealing with drug dealers and just people on the street, and then a very bad rumor comes about him that he did something with someone on the street, um and his whole ministry falling apart. The whole little city, they all had hope him, he came to revive, and he tries coming to this person just defending, but they just have a malice against him. Just have hate toward him, and they just keep going on, and the community's buying it. He did everything possible. I think it's appropriate for him, if he wanted to. He doesn't have to, but if he wanted to, he can sue for defamation.
So I guess let's if let's shift to, if we can,
Mhm.
because I don't know that we'll get anywhere with that.
Okay.
I Because I don't think that, one, you can win a court case and be um, and for it to quote unquote save your ministry. But let's say, um, let's talk about kind of the harm to the church, if that makes sense. So in the sense of like,
Hmm.
if the because missionaries is more difficult. I don't know any much about missionaries. If someone, if a church is being affected by someone saying something that may or may not be true about their pastor,
Hmm.
you would argue that the church should use its money to take the person who's saying this to court to try to silence them, under the assumption that what this person is accusing the pastor of is not true. How does the church know that the accusation is not true?
No, I wouldn't agree with that. I wouldn't agree with that. If the accusations are not true, no, it has to be proven without a shadow of doubt that this person still, that this person is slandering the pastor, that the person's information is, he is bearing false witness. That has to be proven first biblically.
How would a body of believers prove that about their pastor? Like, say for example, you had a situation with TD Jakes recently. Um, you where a handful of guys came forward and said that he assaulted them when they were kids. How would the church prove that it didn't happen? And TD Jakes is actively suing those people for defamation.
Um, I don't know the situation.
Right, but I
If
mean, just like, as a hypothetical,
Yeah.
a young man, so someone in their
Hmm.
20s comes forward and says, "When I was 10 years old, this pastor assaulted me." How would the church prove that this didn't happen?
They could and they could not. If they didn't have enough evidence, then they could not. Like it's, I'm not saying every, like I said, it's a rarity, but it is permitted by the Bible. Like I in that case, in all the case that you just stated, they shouldn't sue for defamation if it's not clear. They should get to the bottom. That person should step down till all the facts come out. If all the facts come out and he is exonerated and it is proven that he's being slanderous, it's his choice. He cannot, like, and that'll be perfectly fine. It's also biblical. But if he
Okay.
did decide, if the reputation is still under question by non-believers or by some people in the church, even though it's proven without shadow of doubt, and like there's no point in me arguing this hypothetical. Like if it's not decided, then they shouldn't sue. If there's no proof, then they shouldn't sue. It's a very specific thing I'm saying.
Okay,
That
so your argument would be that there's a very high bar. There's like an almost impossibly high bar, I would say, that the minister has to meet. And then once the minister has met that bar, they've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, which, is not a anything you ever have to prove in a court of law. But in your example, once the minister proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that what they didn't do what they're being accused of, then they can sue for defamation.
Yes, yes, and if
Okay.
they're continuing, if they didn't repent, yes, they can sue for defamation. If not, again, not out of vengeance, not out of anger, not as retaliation, only if the ministry is affected.
Um, you mentioned we'll say that. So we've met this impossibly high bar. Now you can sue. You mentioned Basil and Augustine when they talked about defamation. Were they talking about secular courts, going to a secular court to sue for defamation? Because you mentioned
No,
monasteries.
because yeah, because at the time they had their judges, like they're in the church, and
Yeah.
um in the early church it was more rare, but as the church took a foothold in the community itself, yeah, the courts became religious courts in a way. And it's funny that even the defamation statute that we have now is descended from Augustus and from Basil. Like it has Christian roots. And most of, I'm sure you know, most of the judicial system has Christian roots.
Right. But the reason I kind of asked that was to do a follow up, which is if what if you're using them kind of as a reference, isn't
Mhm.
what Basil and Augustine saying in line with what Paul was saying in First Corinthians, which is to settle disputes within the church?
It says very specifically trivial cases, and if you do some research, it talks about it's a lot of the times it was money problems. It was, oh, he owes me this much, he owes me this much, and it talks about inside the church. It's all community. If a fellow person, if a fellow member slanders somebody and doesn't repent, they are excommunicated from the church. They are not no longer a believer. And again, I want to go back to this. How does the logic follow if you're if you're sticking with this, that it has to be handled inside the church? Then why do you say that people who have been essayed should go to the cops? Shouldn't they keep it inside the church?
So I pulled up First Corinthians 6 so we can take a look at that. And I'll address your question, which is what's the difference between child essay and going to the courts versus defamation? I would say the difference there is that the church has no ability to, it does not have the power of the sword, right? So the reason that the big difference, and you read Deuteronomy, but the big difference between the law of God giving to the Israelites in the Old Testament and the church today is that Israel had the authority and the right to punish the evildoer. The
Mhm.
church does not. So there is no way for the church doesn't lock people up, right? Whereas defamation is something that the church can settle by within the church. There's no defamation is not a crime. When you go to a court, there's no prosecution for a crime. You have to bring the civil lawsuit against the person who is defaming you. You are asking the judge to punish someone on your behalf. It's not a crime. That's the difference between assault. That's the difference between theft and anything else and defamation. Defamation is not a crime.
But where do you say that, and I'd agree. well, I'll add this: Romans 13, it declares the civil authority is God's
Mhm.
servant for justice. But
Yes.
you say it's a crime, but in the passage, you don't distinguish between a crime and not a crime. Like you're adding that, and I understand why you're adding that. But
Right.
we,
I think for obvious reasons, because a crime carries with it a punishment, a punishment that is doled out by the magistrate. There is no punishment for defamation.
well, there is. I'm not saying pastors should go for the punishment, but if there's a loss of reputation, they have to pay. They have to pay fees. They have to. There is a punishment.
But the money is not paid to the courts, is it? It's not, the government doesn't collect that money. Who collects the money?
Well, the person who was defamed.
Right. So there's a difference there too.
Again, I'm not
When
arguing that the pastor should sue for money. I'm not arguing that. I'm just
Well, so I think that's the big difference there, right? One is a crime, and when one commits a crime, the civil magistrate determines if the crime was committed, and if it was, then there is a punishment, whether it be through loss of life or loss of liberty or loss of funds. They fine you for it. But whatever it is,
so. Or should we be more? Sorry, you finish.
no, that was essentially my thought. That's the difference between that and defamation.
So you're saying that we should stick to what the earthly courts call a crime, because to God, defamation and slander is a crime. It's a moral crime, and
Mhm.
in the Old Testament, they punished this moral crime civilly. So you're going back and justifying yourself from the worldly courts and saying this is a crime. Slander is not. Yes, technically in the world, slander is not a crime. To God, slander is a crime. It's a moral crime. It's a moral sin.
Right. Does the other there are other moral crimes and sins that Scripture has? For example, covetousness. Right. That's one of the commandments.
Mhm,
Thou shalt not covet.
mhm.
Would you also then propose that we punish that somehow? No. No.
But what's the
Mhm.
punishment in the Old Testament for that?
For
Like
covetousness, I'm not
for
sure.
covetousness. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not sure either. But
Right.
what
I
I'm
couldn't tell
saying
you.
that
Mhm.
yeah, but you and I both agree that sins hold different values. And like people
Mhm.
say, oh, all sins are equal. It's not true. The Bible states that specifically and rates not in order, but it says this is an abomination. This is a sin against your own flesh. There's different versions of sin, and false bearing false witness is up there with, like I said, it could be punishable. That and not, I believe there's like 28 laws that are broken in the Old Testament that could be punishable by death, and defamation is one of them. I think nowadays we try to minimize it and say, oh, it's just lying about someone, but it was very serious in the eyes of God and in the eyes of the Israel people, and I would say in the eyes of Paul and all the early fathers of our church.
So I wanted to touch on 1 Corinthians 6. And I've heard
Mhm.
this argument made by a couple of people that what Paul is trying to argue is that um, he is only referring to trivial cases here. So he only wants the church to deal with the minor stuff, and the bigger stuff you have to take to the civil authorities. Um,
Mhm.
do you, reading this text in its full context, um, he starts out by saying, when one of you has a grievance against another, does he dare to go to law before the unrighteous instead of the saints? So he's talking about a grievance, right? Something somebody did to you. Doesn't grievance
Mhm.
kind of sound like someone lying about you? And then,
Absolutely not.
um, okay,
Absolutely
no,
not.
okay. And then he says,
Lying, maybe. Slander, no.
do you not know that the saints will judge the world? And if the world is to be judged by you, are you incompetent to try trivial cases? Does this not seem like what Paul often does in his letters, which is to exaggerate, to say things in hyperbole, to point to an obvious fact, which is he's saying you will judge the world. Whatever issues you have within the church, they are trivial compared to that. You will judge angels. Whatever issues you have, you can resolve them within the church because they are trivial compared to that, right? When Paul says, even if I speak with the tongues of angels, but I do not have love. He's not saying there are angel tongues. He's saying he's using that hyperbole, that exaggeration, right? So in this case, is he not saying you are going to be judging the entire world? Whatever issues you have, they're trivial compared to that. He's not saying judge trivial things in the church and bigger things take to the civil magistrate.
I mean, if that's your interpretation, I don't see it. Honestly, I'm not trying to. Like, I honestly don't see it. Even from the wording, when one of you has a grievance against another, it's not if one of you sins against another. It's a grievance. It's an everyday dispute. People did a job for someone in the church, they didn't get paid. It's a grievance. It's a trivial case. It's not something that you should bring to court in. I think that's where you say, and I agree that I would say that's what you would agree with too, because if it's SA, you don't keep it in the church. You bring it to the judges. You bring it to the civil court. That's what you would say.
Okay, so I just pulled up the NASB, and I'm looking to see if they have the Living Standard Bible here, LSB, Legacy Standard Bible, which are more literal translations. So in a more literal translation, the word that is being used there is when one has a case against another.
Are you saying this sins against each other also goes into that?
Yeah, case. You have a case against someone else.
Yeah, I'm not asking your opinion. Are you saying if someone sins against a brother, it's talking about that?
Yeah, it's talking about you sinning against someone, yes. The church should be able to resolve that dispute. And then the other thing I would kind of go to is...
but like, again, you're saying that, but then you're flippantly leaving out that, but not in all cases. If it's, in your words, criminal, but
yes,
that's a very again, subjective way of looking at it. Well, what's criminal in your eyes, or what's criminal in God's eyes?
Right. No, so a criminal would be something, and I think, and you might agree with this, is a criminal case is something that requires or calls for a person to lose life or liberty. That is what a criminal case is. It is something that if you do it, you lose life or liberty, as in you get killed by the state or the state locks you up. That is what a criminal case is. The church doesn't have the authority to take someone's life or lock them up, and so they cannot try a case that would result in that punishment because it would be pointless. Even if you decided whatever this person did was worthy of death, it wouldn't matter, right? But a defamation suit isn't that.
I in today's terms, but you're still using your subjective. You're saying one is criminal. One right now, how we feel about it back in the day, that's how they felt about it. But then I bring you back to Exodus. I bring you back to the law of Moses, the objective law of God that he passed down to Moses. We're saying, the objective law of God that he gave to Moses. And the punishment required. This was a punishment also ordered by God for Moses to tell the people. It's like you're equating one with the crime. With you're pretty much ranking the defamation. Like I would use slander. The defamation is a modern term, but slander. But you're ranking slander and SA when I feel like it's not warranted, or you're putting our context onto the early churches where a lot of early church fathers, they didn't believe marital SA was a thing, but you would disagree with that.
Yeah, that's that takes us off topic.
We don't have to go there.
explore this idea of the Old Testament. Do you think that there is a difference between the modern court system and that of the laws and the judges that God instructed in the Old Testament? Is there a difference between the judges of the Old Testament and the judges of America in 2025?
Yeah, absolutely.
So would it make
But
sense?
God's morals have not changed.
Mhm.
God's sin and punishment for sin has not
Mhm.
changed. His
That
objective, it's forever.
Yes, that is correct. But if you are, does it not seem to you that you are trying to fit two things together that don't fit together? So you are taking a crime and a punishment from the Old Testament that
Mhm.
went along with a criminal system and a judges from the Old Testament,
Mhm.
and you are taking the crime and the punishment, and you're trying to fit it with the criminal system of today.
No, I'm not even forcing the old way to go. I'm just saying it was objectively good. It was objectively a sin to bear false witness, and it was punishable by death. And God found that to be good to him, to punish um, people who were slander their brother, to punish him by death. God found that to be good. I'm saying God doesn't change.
Mhm.
I'm not saying God wants right now people to be murdered or killed for slander, but I'm saying it's biblically backed up that you could go for full extent of your current law. So right now they're not going to kill someone, they're not going to burn them at the stakes for defamation, but to the extent that we can pursue legal action, I don't think there's a forbiddance in the Bible.
The Old Testament, generally speaking, in the law, if you look at the Old Testament, had an allowance that could be characterized as an eye for an eye.
Mhm.
Does that remain in the New Testament?
Has that changed in the New Testament?
Mm-hmm.
It, I would say it hasn't changed. It's been expanded. It's not. It's like, I mean, like you said, the punishment was directly eye for an eye. So whatever you accuse them of, that's what you're getting if you are proven. But are you, are you just trying to say that the Old Testament, like the Old Testament, God fulfilled, Jesus Christ fulfilled the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
We don't live eye for eye. He expanded it. It's not as simple as that.
Well, the reason I asked that question, let me pull up. This is where is it on here?
Hmm.
Screen share. This would be Matthew 5:38. You have heard it said, "Eye for eye and tooth for tooth," which would accurately describe, I think, the Old Testament um, description of the law and of the criminal system. And then Jesus says, "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. If anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles." Um, how do you reconcile that description of Christ with the desire to have a secular, unrighteous court system that is in America prove your righteousness?
Um, I don't see the correlation there. And I think you're playing both sides of it too when you're saying I'm using the unrighteous court, but you also fully appreciate of the unrighteous court when it's for crimes, as you say. Um, Again, I spoke in the opening, but Matthew 5, I think it's very watered down. It's not God saying to just be passive and just let things happen. I think oppositely, it's stand up for the truth. It's like Jesus said to the was it the Pharisees? Not the Pharisees. It was the
When he was
who
before
he
the
was
Jewish
speaking to directly
court, right?
before the Jewish court. Yeah, if I said something wrong, um, testify to the wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why do you strike me? It's
Hmm.
Jesus. Why didn't Jesus turn the cheek and just let him hit? Because it wasn't true. Like he was preaching truth in that moment, and that's why I think the verse is like, again, you're taking. I think it's a um, broader point of that verse or of that passage in Matthew 5. It's not just turn your left cheek. You have to, like you said in the other, you have to look at the whole thing. What is the message there?
Well, what would you say is the message that Jesus is saying? Let them strike the other cheek unless you're speaking the truth. Then don't let them do it.
Let me open up.
The other, well, I guess, yeah, you can pull up Matthew 5. That was
Yeah,
5:38.
Yep. Mhm.
So this would be right after the Beatitudes. And the other one that
Mhm.
I would bring up from the Beatitudes would be here. Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me. Rejoice and be glad, because great is your reward in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you. So here, Jesus is saying, blessed are you when they falsely say all kinds of evil against you. And
This is
then he
not
talks
exactly
about
what he's
being,
saying.
no, I
It's
mean, that's, I'm quoting,
mistreated.
no, I'm quoting
No,
that
it's
like
saying
literally
it's saying can you read the
this
first part again?
verse
It
11.
said
Verse 11.
verse 11.
Yeah, if you pull up 5:11.
Yeah, persecute you. Like, again, we go into your understanding and my understanding, and we might disagree on what the verse means, but
Mhm.
um
Well, what do you think it means when Christ says, blessed are you when people insult you, persecute you, and falsely say all kinds of evil against you because of me? Is a minister having someone say all kinds of evil about them that doesn't fit into that category?
it can and it can't. Like, again, because of me, or is it because of the person, the slanderer's evil in their own heart? It's getting persecuted for Christ,
Is a
right? That's what it
minister
said.
is a minister doing the work of the gospel and being
Yes.
slandered because of that? Wouldn't that be for
He
Christ?
can be slandered for that, but
Mm-hmm.
it does it's not. It also can be that it's not because of that. Correct? It's a possibility. It's not. It's every time ministered, someone has it. It's not because of Christ that bad comes upon him. Correct?
So I guess my interpretation of this text is
Mhm.
that Christ is speaking to his disciples, both current and future, and he is speaking to them generally, saying that as my disciples, as followers of me, when you experience these things, you are experiencing them for me as my disciples. And
Mhm.
so rejoice in these things. That's how I would take that verse. He says,
How do you feel about Paul appealing to Caesar in Acts 25?
well, let's look. Let me pull up Acts 25 to see Paul's trial before Festus.
Mhm.
The Jewish leaders appeared before him and presented the charges against Paul. They requested Festus, as a favor to them, to have Paul transferred to Jerusalem, for they were preparing to ambush and kill him along the way. And then Paul made his defense. I have done nothing wrong against the Jewish law or against the temple or against Caesar. And then he requests to be tried in front of Caesar, or appeals to Caesar as a Roman citizen. And I think this is a very clear example that the Bible does not call us, when we are brought before the authorities, to not speak in our defense. And I think you could very reasonably separate a defamation lawsuit, which is you suing someone, attacking someone else with the lawsuit. Yes, they slandered you, but now you've turned around and you are going after them. That, as compared to when you are brought before a court and you are called to testify, and so you testify in your defense. I don't see a contradiction there. I don't see a reason why you couldn't separate the two.
I'm combining this with what you just said. What should Christians do when they're being persecuted, when people are lying about them? Did Paul take the lies? Did Paul take the punishment they're going to give? Or did he refute and speak the truth and say, you can't do this to me? Take me
Right.
from Caesar.
Right. So
He
Paul, in
didn't
this
just
case,
take it.
right. In this case, Paul said, I want to be tried in front of Caesar. Yeah. I don't see a problem or a reason why Paul saying he wants to be tried by Caesar as his right as a Roman citizen, that being a bad example of him facing persecution. The Bible doesn't doesn't require us to what's the right word? To not speak in our defense. The speaking in our defense is great. I love that. I support that. If with my intro and with my opening statement, that's exactly what I said the minister should do. I said that they should hire a third-party investigator to investigate the church and investigate everything and then speak. Put the truth out there. Speak the truth. Speak in their defense. A defamation lawsuit is not that. A defamation lawsuit is an opportunity to use the power of the courts to silence someone. And you and I have no idea if the person being silenced is speaking truth or not.
It can be. I agree. It can be used for that, but it can also lead for the truth coming out. And there's no debating that.
But how would we know that? That's the problem with the defamation suit, is it cannot prove anything. All it proves, all a defamation lawsuit proves.
I'm not arguing just defamation. I'm arguing a very specific point, and we would talk about this. It has to be. It's very specific. It's all other points have been tried. This person has been proven to at least the brothers. There's proof that this person is falsely accusing or slandering one of the members, one of the pastors, and then damaging the ministry of said pastor, said church, then it is permissible. Like, I would need proof from the Bible saying that's not permissible.
Right. Well, so then 1 Thessalonians 5:15. Make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always strive to do what is good for each other and for everyone else. Does this not look to seek a defamation lawsuit? Is it not looking to do wrong and to find vindication in the secular court?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, if you take someone to court for defamation and say you win the defamation suit, what would you want to see as the outcome of that lawsuit?
The truth to be preserved.
In what sense?
Wrongdoer, like literally just the truth being out and public, saying this person was found guilty for defamation. He slandered this person maliciously, and now it's been proven that this person, pastor, elder, was vindicated of all of the lies that were spread.
But do you know that a defamation lawsuit only proves that you won a defamation lawsuit? it doesn't prove that what was said against you was a lie. It just proves that you won the defamation lawsuit.
Yeah,
For example,
but
and,
it proves
let
that
me.
that person was judged by a jury of their peers to
Mhm.
say that they did defame the pastor, the person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it just proves that you lost a defamation suit is all it proves. And the reason I say that is because I
I
have a
mean,
good.
it's like saying losing a murder case just means you lost the murder case. It's you murdered someone, and another you.
No. So losing a trial for murder gets you imprisoned, or you face whatever punishment, and it also shows that the prosecution was able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you committed this crime. That's what that means. And
And for
so,
defamation, it
mhm.
proves that either jury of peers or the judge found it that you did defame the person. It's the
Right.
same thing. You're saying it different ways.
Yeah, no. So you won the defamation suit, but the reason I say it like that, and the reason I mention it like that, is because there's a fun example. There's a ministry of a man called Ravi Zacharias.
Mhm.
RZIM is the name of the ministry. He was probably the most famous Christian apologist of the 21st century, and there was a woman who came out and accused him of having an inappropriate relationship with her. He sued her for defamation. And he, thanks to $1 million donation from a wealthy donor and also ministry funds, he was able to sue this woman into silence and get her to sign an NDA. If they had gone to court, she didn't have enough evidence to prove that they had this inappropriate relationship. He probably would have won that case for defamation. After his death, it turned out that Ravi Zacharias was a sexual deviant. He was going to massage parlors, and he was paying off women for the things that they were doing to him. This only came out after his death. So, in this situation, if Ravi Zacharias had won a defamation suit, all it would have proven was that Ravi had won a defamation suit. Not that this woman lied, because this woman, and he would have been able to continue his ministry, and the money would have kept flowing, and everything would have been so good. But the truth wouldn't have been the truth. That wouldn't have been justice. That would have been the use of money to silence someone who was speaking the truth. And that is at its core, I find that is the problem with defamation lawsuits, is it is an opportunity for someone with more money. And that is a problem with the entire American court system, the entire civil court system. The person with more money wins. That is how civil lawsuits work. It's the
Yeah, but
money wins the case.
I even agree with you. Like I don't understand the point of that story. I know the story is right. It's horrible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
Well, so the
and
point of that
but
story is you're
there's also
advocating.
examples.
Mm-hmm.
There's also examples the other way where the defamation was filed and they. I mean, you can bring it up. I don't have exact story, but I can search for one if you want. Of even America when there were
Mm-hmm.
Salem witch trials, and not just there, but in Europe, where women specifically, were falsely accused of being whores. I don't know how else to say it. And then they filed to their judge. Yes, maybe it was their church, and then there was a suit, and they were cleared of all charges. And that's a good story, and it works. Like, is there bad
Right. Well,
defamation
within the
suits? Yes.
church,
Is there good defamation suits? Yes.
I'm all for it within the church. As I've said, there's a biblical principle for us to settle disputes in the church. But the reason I'm arguing against defamation is because you are taking what is a biblical principle, which is do not bear false witness, and you are trying to apply it in the context of a corrupt and broken legal system that exists here in the United States. And what I mean by that is, and I can, I'll give you another example of that. My employer had me sign a non-compete letter that was not enforceable because he didn't meet the requirements of the law. I went to talk to an attorney, and the attorney told me he can take you to court and he will sue, and your legal defense, even though he's technically in the wrong, he can't come after you for this non-compete. But if he does, your defense will cost about $60,000. And what you'll find is that whenever someone is sued for defamation, not the minister gets to use church funds to go after somebody. The person that did the accusation, they don't. They have to use their personal funds. And more often than not, because they cannot pay for their legal defense, they end up having to settle, and they end up having to sign an NDA and take back what they said. That's another key difference between the legal system and the judicial system of the Old Testament that you refer to and you go to say, look, defamation is an evil that God hates, and he punished it. Well, in the Old Testament, in Israel, the guy with more money didn't win the case. In America, that's exactly what happens.
Not always. Like it's you're saying you're drawing a picture, and I get it, but yes, there are those cases. In some cases, the truth comes out. And truth, are you saying, like, you're not going to come here and say that the truth never comes out, it's always the guy with the more money? No, sometimes the truth does prevail. Like,
so
I don't know. We're not disagreeing about that at all.
Uh-huh.
Like, the justice system is, but that's the justice system we have here.
Right. So you would call the minister you would say, you know what, churches should sue and ministers should sue for defamation, even though this system is broken, even though it does not seek justice, even though it is a system where the one with more money wins, even though it is a system that abusers with money use to silence victims, it is still the system that the church should rely on to protect its good name.
But it goes the same way. That same system handles the crimes that you say should be handed over to them.
So
the same system that handles that's a bad system, apparently.
It is a bad system.
It's the same system you entrust the SA victims to go.
Yes. And the reason, and there's a key difference between civil litigation and criminal litigation, and that is, what does a defendant in a criminal case get if they cannot afford a lawyer? They get a lawyer. Defendant. Yeah. They get a lawyer that's paid for. What does, in a civil lawsuit, what does a defendant that cannot afford a lawyer get?
Nobody. Yeah.
And so I guess I think we can honestly, I think both of us could actually, I think we can agree on this point. If we change the topic of the debate slightly, I think we can be both on the affirmative. And what I mean by that is, if we can argue that if the American justice system was set up the way the justice system of God was set up in the Old Testament, then we could, and God would instruct us to, seek justice if we were living under the law, to seek justice for false witness in court. I think we would both agree with that. If we're living in Israel, someone has bore false witness against us, we need to go to the judges and we need to seek restitution from those judges. We would both agree with
Christian
that.
Nationalism.
Yes, that's a different topic of debate, but that's a good one too.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think
But and
I
so
think we might even agree on
mhm,
this. Like, is it, or just if you can answer this straight
mhm.
question, is it forbade in every single instances, no matter the details, that no Christian should go into for defamation? That you strictly fully against that? Like,
No,
there's
so
no possible hypothetical.
no. So I think for the purposes of a debate, one
Hmm.
one side has to argue the affirmative, and the other one has to argue against it, right? And
Yeah.
so this is not a situation where I take a hard line stance. So like if we were arguing for the death of unborn children, then I would take
Hmm.
a hard line stance on this. This isn't that. So I think, and this is an area again, like where I will extend the olive branch, and I will agree with you that I think that even if it means, quote unquote, losing this debate, is that there is a hypothetical situation in which a church
Hmm.
minister can seek restitution in through the form of a defamation suit if what they're
Hmm.
suing for is for the court to ask the person to um, retract their statements and correct whatever lies they've said. But you have set such a high bar for when that is okay that I think, me saying I'm okay with it means that it'll
Doesn't
never
mean much.
happen.
I got you.
Doesn't mean
Yeah.
much because
I think
your bar is so high.
yeah, yeah. I think most of our conversations are like that, where we're kind of saying the same thing but disagreeing.
Right.
where
Right.
like, yes, the bar was set so high because it's a logical possibility of that happening. Is that the first thing, like I said before, is that the first thing pastors or anyone should run to for defamation? Like you said, run to this worldly court? Or no, I would disagree with that. It's strictly the high standard, and yeah, I think it's a good middle ground.
Good. Good. I'm glad we kind of we met in the middle. And realistically, I think
Yeah.
that's probably the wisest, I guess, stance, if that makes sense, to have on it. Because there is probably theoretically a situation where a defamation suit would be called for, but I think it's also very reasonable to argue that the vast majority of times defamation suits are used to silence victims.
I'd agree.
Yeah.
I'd agree. A lot of times, defamation shouldn't be used. Maybe a lot of times they do. I wouldn't know about the stat on that if there's silencing victims.
Um, I wanted to um, um, comment on some of the people things people wrote in the comments here. Paul was
Mhm.
saying there are multiple pastors, especially in the U.S., who make multiple millions. Can't assume every pastor uses church money for the lawsuit. So, and that's fair. I mean, there are obviously people, pastors that are very wealthy, but generally speaking, they're very wealthy because of um, their church salaries or books that they've sold to Christians. So, yes, theoretically, it could be quote unquote personal funds that would be used for the suit, but you got to figure that most of the time the money had either indirectly come from the church or from other Christians. But yeah, theoretically, it's possible they're not
Yeah,
using church
and like I
money; they're
said
using
before,
their own.
it's subjective on like what you think church money it should be used on, and what I think and what anyone thinks. So, uh, yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe that's another kind of topic for discussion or debate. Is there such a thing as like things that a church should spend money on and things that a church shouldn't spend money on? But yeah, I guess people will have different takes. Um, Romik is saying Russ is saying vengeance is the Lord's except for when it comes to SA. No, so I would say that vengeance is the Lord's ultimate in all things, but when it comes to crime, that's Romans 13, that the magistrate has the sword to exact punishment.
But you agree with me, throughout history, different kinds of, even SA has been considered a civil matter compared to now it's a criminal.
Mm, I don't know. Um, I guess yeah. So it's fair to say that throughout history laws have changed, and so some things have been seen as crimes, and then at other times there were not crimes.
Mhm.
Um, but I guess what I would say is if they're not seen crimes by the state, then they should be handled within the church community. I don't know. You don't think that that's a reasonable standard to have, which is that if it is a crime and it is punishable by the state, that you should go to the state. And if it is a civil dispute, that it should be handled by the church body?
No, I completely agree. If it's a crime, you send them. But I think it's a little bit. I don't think the logic quite follows. Maybe I'm wrong, but you draw a line that is influenced by your ideas and your interpretation right now, how you see SA, how the society around us sees SA, or different kinds of SA. Um, where I'd fully agree. I think if someone breaks a crime, the law should handle them.
Yes, and I would say if the magistrate does not see, for example, you mentioned spousal abuse.
Hmm.
When one spouse commits SA against another spouse, even if the state does not recognize, so if the state doesn't recognize that as a crime, well, the state can't help you. So that doesn't help your argument. If anything, it helps my argument, which is in this case, the church should punish the evildoer as much as the church can, which is through church discipline and excommunication and just general kind of societal or church pressure, and shame.
I think the point I was making was more it's subjective. Like throughout time, like marital SA. Right now, I'm guessing you would say you should hand her over to the police. That should be given over, and that's a crime.
If it's a
But
crime, yep.
it's subjective. Yeah, it's if uh, but it's subjective throughout time. If that was a civil matter or a criminal matter, like
Yes.
that's the thing.
Yep.
It's not an objective stance that
True.
the
But
church held in for some reason.
yeah, but slander or defamation has never been a crime outside of like, or I guess in modern
In modern,
European
yes, in
history.
modern, yeah.
Yes. Yep. So, um, Chamomile was saying good reputation matters and to witness. I think that's more so in support of what you were saying, that a good reputation matters to your Christian witness and defending the
Mhm.
reputation matters. Um, Romik was asking, would there be different actions if the person doing the defamation inside the church or if they're outside the church?
It's not a question for you. I'm like reading Romans. I mean, the First
Yeah,
Corinthians 6.
right. So no, obviously, yes, church would not church discipline and settling a dispute within the church would matter if the person isn't in the church. So then it is different. But then that's when you enter into the world of, do you win when you take someone to court for defamation? Is that a net positive? And this is more so of a subjective call. This is something you guys, watching this have to decide for yourselves what you think. In my opinion, I don't think that winning a defamation suit is a win from a reputational standpoint and from a ministry standpoint. But obviously, that's my take on it.
Yeah, I'd agree. But there's always a chance. there, there's always a possibility it does
Right,
turn
right,
out
right,
to the
right.
good. Yeah.
Well, this is a good one. Maybe this is a different conversation entirely, but Paul is saying many churches nowadays are known for their big pastor name. So if pastor's name is falsely accused, the whole church will be affected. And that's very true, like we saw with the downfall of Mars Hill. But probably even better example is Robert Morris and Gateway. So Gateway
Mm.
was probably the largest church in America, if not the largest. I mean, tens of thousands of people, and bunch of campuses, multi hundreds of millions of dollars coming in every year to that ministry. And because of Robert Morris's downfall, Gateway essentially stopped existing. Um, but that's where the catch-22 comes in, right? Because if Robert Morris had used the legal system to silence Cindy Clemenshire and preserve his ministry, Gateway would still exist. Robert's good name would still exist, but Robert Morris assaulted Cindy for like 4 years when she was a minor. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
so
there's a
that's
lot of
where
examples.
the challenge. Yeah,
Even speaking to my father we're originally from Kazakhstan, and there was a pastor who was also accused of child SA, and he stepped down. He stayed quiet. He just was in the back, and then eventually it came out that she repented and said she made it all up. And I'm full support of that. I'm full support of that. Like, that's not wrong, but like at the same time, like the pastor could have, again, I don't even want to go back to the defamation thing, but yeah.
yeah. Well, and the other thing that you kind of brought up was that the church should exhaust all of its, should investigate on their own, was kind of what you were saying. And
Hmm.
um, Robert Morris is another good example of this, because they, the church supposedly didn't know anything about what he did. And then it turned out they actually did know about what they did, and then they were okay with it. And then they changed the story again. So it was like, that's the other issue. Not only are the churches corrupt, not only are the not only are the courts potentially corrupt or flawed, or the whole kind of criminal, the whole civil litigation system is broken because of money. But also, if you are saying the church has to first investigate and determine if this this is true, what this person is saying is true or not, most of the time, the church doing its investigation on itself is going to find that it and its minister or its pastor didn't do anything wrong. If you look, every single time the church investigates itself, it finds no wrongdoing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think human error, human sin will always be there. And like, does that mean we stop having faith in our pastors and leaders? No. But I think it's more of a wake up call to not rely on the people we listen to, or not to fully put our whole faith through them and say, like, because a lot of people do, like when big names fall, a lot of people are saddened by it and lose faith in it. So I think that's a very important thing to remember, where we can't put our faith in humans. Humans always fail.
Absolutely. Dimitri, thank you for the super chat. The Yeah, he made a good point, which is it was a civil case when the family had a right to exact revenge on the perpetrator. So that's kind of that whole in the Old Testament about the eye for an eye, if and that's where you had the cities of refuge, that if you killed someone, you could run away and try to hide from that. So
Hmm.
we don't have the cities of refuge. So there's another way we're different from the Old Testament. I guess
Yeah.
we have countries of refuge, right? We have countries you can run to that don't have extradition.
Well, that's nuts. You go there, I might get banned. The video might get banned.
Right. But yeah, so, and that's where I struggle kind of bringing Old Testament concepts into, and Old Testament law into our present day, unless we are under Christian nationalism. But even then, Christian nationalism wouldn't be Old Testament law, so it'd be
I'd agree.
something different.
Yeah,
Um,
I think I mostly brought up the Old Testament to show God's objective morals, and those are still true. Yes, we don't live under a law. Jesus Christ fulfilled the law, but those objective moral laws were objective.
Agreed. Yes, God hates slander, and God hates those who bear false witness. That I agree with. The yeah, my wife. I'm a little bit of a cynic, and my wife was telling me like, Russ, you can't just. It feels like you're part of the Me Too movement. You just believe all victims, and I'm like, no, I'm not that. But name one case that you know of where someone came forward and accused a minister of evil doing and it turned out to be not true. I'm sure it happens every once in a while, but it is just every single time victims step forward, it turns out to be much worse than we even initially
Mhm.
thought. To where
Absolutely.
my knee-jerk reaction is to say, no, we shouldn't be suing people who come forward because it seems like they're always telling the truth.
Touche, touche.
So there's that. All right. Any
Yeah.
final thoughts or kind of words on this before we wrap up?
No, I just want to thank you for this opportunity to talk to you. I really enjoyed it. Um, yeah, I appreciate
Yes,
it.
sir.
Thank you for the
No, thank
listeners.
you. Thank you for everyone who stuck around with us. Stan, thank you for your time. I appreciate you. There are so few people that are willing to have this kind of debate that I appreciate you coming forward. Hopefully, we can do more of these, and hopefully, more people will be interested in looking to have this kind of conversation. I think it is a positive both for us. It helps us hear different
Yeah,
things and maybe reconsider some of our positions, but also those who are listening in the larger body to hear things that maybe they hadn't considered before and either consider a different position or maybe reconsider or be strengthened in whatever position they held to initially.
yeah.
So thank you all. God bless and good night.